The notification arrived with the subtlety of a supernova, blinking insistently on my datapad, amidst the usual detritus of grant rejections and pleas for peer review. It wasn't an email, not precisely, more like a system-level intrusion, a sleek black window that bypassed all my security protocols. Penrose Industries, it read, the stark white text against the obsidian background almost vibrating with self-importance. A single line followed. Dr. Arthur Beckett, your presence is requested. Demonstration of unparalleled scientific significance. Absolute confidentiality is required and guaranteed. Coordinates enclosed. My first instinct was to dismiss it. Penrose, Cassius Penrose. The name evoked a mixture of fascination and revulsion within the scientific community. A recluse billionaire, the architect of Penrose Industries, a man who had made his fortune pushing the boundaries of quantum computing, materials science, and, most controversially, aerospace engineering. He was rumored to be brilliant, erratic, and utterly devoid of ethical considerations. I'd steered clear of corporate funding for years, ever since the university started prioritizing patents over pure research. I'd become, effectively, a scientific pariah, scraping by on consulting work, while chasing the faint echoes of the early universe. But the coordinates? They pointed to a remote location in the Scottish Highlands, a place where Penrose had reportedly built a private research facility, a sanctuary from the prying eyes of the world. And the phrase, unparalleled scientific significance, that was the hook, the bait. My work on observational cosmology, on the search for exoplanets and the subtle anomalies in the cosmic microwave background, had stalled. I was chasing ghosts, increasingly convinced that I was missing something fundamental, a piece of the puzzle that would either unlock the secrets of the universe or confirm my deepest fear, that there were no secrets, only random fluctuations in an indifferent void. The cursor hovered over the delete icon. It wasn't just the ethical concerns. There was a deeper unease, a prickling sensation as if some unseen observer had just taken an interest in me. I called Peterson. We hadn't spoken in months, not since our acrimonious split over the university's latest partnership with a defense contractor. He'd stayed, choosing the security of tenure over his principles. I'd left, choosing, well, I wasn't sure what I'd chosen, obscurity perhaps. Arthur, his voice was hesitant, edged with a familiar blend of pity and disdain. To what do I owe the displeasure? Penrose, I said, the word feeling heavy and cold in my mouth. He's invited me to his estate, claims he's made a breakthrough. A long silence followed. I could almost hear him rolling his eyes. And you're considering it? Arthur, the man's a charlatan, a showman. He preys on the desperate and the disillusioned. I know, but what if he's not? What if he's actually found something? And what if he's sacrificing virgins to the great old ones? Peterson snorted. Look, Arthur, I appreciate your existential angst, but Penrose is bad news. He'll use you, milk you for your ideas, and then discard you like a used lab rat. Thanks for the encouragement, I muttered. Just be careful, Arthur, he said, his tone softening slightly. Promise me you'll be careful. I didn't promise. I couldn't. The packing was a perfunctory ritual. Corduroy trousers, tweed jackets, sturdy boots. My datapad, of course, loaded with my research, my simulations, my increasingly frantic notes. A worn copy of Cosmos by Sagan, a relic from a more optimistic time. And, almost as an afterthought, the small, smooth river stone I always carried. A habit, I suppose. A tactile anchor in a world that often felt increasingly intangible. I ran it between my index finger and thumb, the cool, smooth surface a momentary distraction from the knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. The journey north was a descent into isolation. The sleek, electric car Penrose Industries had sent for me glided silently through the increasingly bleak landscape, the bustling cities giving way to rolling hills, then to rugged mountains shrouded in mist. The scenery, which should have been awe-inspiring, only amplified my sense of unease. The vastness of the sky, the implacable indifference of the landscape, mirrored the anxieties churning within me. It was all I couldn't help but thinking to a first approximation, a stage set, a backdrop for something I couldn't yet comprehend. The estate appeared abruptly, a stark, angular structure of concrete, steel, and glass, carved into the side of a mountain. It wasn't beautiful. It was imposing, a fortress designed to keep the world out and something else in. The car passed through a series of security checkpoints, each more elaborate than the last. Drones humming overhead, laser grids flickering into existence, biometric scanners analyzing my every feature. It was a level of security I'd only encountered in classified government facilities, and even then, it had never felt quite so personal. Mr. Jones, Penrose's security chief, met me at the main entrance. He was a man of few words and even fewer expressions. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't even make eye contact. He simply gestured for me to follow him, his silence more unnerving than any overt threat. We moved through corridors of polished concrete, past minimalist furniture and walls adorned with abstract art. The air was cool and sterile, devoid of any scent, any hint of human habitation. It felt like walking through a machine, a carefully constructed environment designed to control every variable. The waiting room was a study in minimalist opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the mountains, but the view was obscured by a layer of polarized glass, rendering the landscape a muted, monochrome tableau. 4 other figures were already present, seated in angular chairs that looked more like sculptures than furniture. They were my fellow invitees, the chosen few. Dr. Anderson, a particle physicist, I recognized from his published work on quantum field theory. He was younger than I'd expected, with a restless energy that seemed barely contained. Dr. Collins, a cosmologist specializing in dark matter, was older, his face etched with the weariness of long years spent grappling with the universe's hidden dimensions. Dr. Dixon, an exobiologist, was a figure largely unknown outside of certain classified circles. His reputation built on projects conducted under strict government non-disclosure agreements and associated with unconventional theories. And finally, Dr. Powell, a theoretical physicist whose work on string theory bordered on the metaphysical. He was the youngest of the group. The introductions were brief, tense, punctuated by awkward silences. Each scientist, it seemed, was guarding their own secrets, their own ambitions. There was a clear undercurrent of competition, a subtle jockeying for position, even before we knew what we were competing for. I tried to engage them in conversation, attempting to break the ice with some dry, self-deprecating humor, but my attempts fell flat. They were either too preoccupied with their own thoughts or simply unwilling to connect. I felt increasingly like an outsider, a relic from a bygone era of scientific inquiry. I was starting to regret coming. And then he arrived. Cassius Penrose. He wasn't what I'd expected. I'd imagined a towering figure, a man exuding power and charisma. Instead, he was frail, almost skeletal. His skin was translucent, stretched taut over sharp bones. But his eyes were piercing, burning with an intensity that belied his physical weakness. They seemed to look through me, as if assessing my worth, my potential, my vulnerability. He moved slowly, leaning heavily on a black cane made from some unfamiliar metal. The silence in the room deepened, all eyes drawn to him as if to a gravitational singularity. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a surprisingly resonant baritone, despite his apparent frailty. "Welcome to my sanctuary, to the threshold of discovery." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. The silence was absolute, expectant. "I have brought you here," he continued, his eyes sweeping over each of us in turn, "to witness something extraordinary, something that will redefine your understanding of the cosmos, something that will challenge your most fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality." He gestured with his cane, a slow, sweeping motion that encompassed the entire room, the entire estate, perhaps even the entire world outside. I have spent my life pursuing the ultimate question, the question of creation, and I believe, gentlemen, that I have found the answer. He turned, his eyes locking onto mine for a fleeting, unsettling moment. "Come," he said, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. "Let me show you." He led us, a procession of hesitant disciples following a cryptic prophet, towards the research wing. The corridor stretched on forever, the polished concrete walls reflecting our silent procession like a distorted mirror. Penrose led the way, his cane tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the floor. I glanced at the other scientists. Anderson was practically vibrating with anticipation, his eyes darting around, taking in every detail. Collins maintained a stoic composure, but I noticed a slight tremor in his hands. Dixon walked with a measured, almost military gait. Powell, the youngest, seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if he were already contemplating the theoretical implications of whatever Penrose was about to reveal. We reached a massive circular door, constructed from a seamless sheet of the same black metal as Penrose's cane. It slid open, revealing a chamber that stole the breath from my lungs. It was vast, circular, the ceiling lost in shadow. But it wasn't the size or the atmosphere that struck me. It was the contents. The chamber was filled with rows of glass jars, of varying sizes, each one resting on a pedestal of polished metal. And within each jar, a universe. I stared, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Miniature universes swirling with nebulae, star clusters, and the ethereal glow of billions of stars contained within galaxies of all shapes and sizes. Some jars showed universes dominated by spiral galaxies like our own Milky Way. Others were filled with elliptical galaxies, and some contained irregular, chaotic formations of matter and energy. They weren't static images. They were moving, evolving, rotating with a slow, majestic grace. It was like looking into a collection of cosmic snow globes, each one containing an entire universe in miniature, each developing according to its own unique set of rules. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, a feeling of being simultaneously infinitely small and impossibly large. The other scientists reacted with a chorus of gasps and exclamations. "Remarkable, aren't they?" Penrose's voice cut through the excited chatter, his tone laced with a quiet, almost smug satisfaction. "I call them universe jars. Each one contains a complete, self-contained cosmos, a miniature universe governed by its own set of physical laws." "But how?" Collins stammered. This violates every principle of thermodynamics, of cosmology, of everything." Penrose smiled, a thin, almost reptilian expression. "Not violates, Dr. Collins. Transcends. I have discovered a way to manipulate the fundamental constants, to create and control the fabric of reality within these enclosures." He gestured towards a complex device positioned at the center of the chamber, a network of cables, conduits, and crystals. "The chronoton field generator. It allows me to accelerate, decelerate, or even reverse the flow of time within each jar relative to our own. I can observe the birth and death of stars, the evolution of galaxies, the rise and fall of civilizations, all within a matter of hours, or even minutes." He demonstrated, his frail hand hovering over a control panel studded with unlabeled buttons and a single smooth dial of black metal. He twisted the dial, and one of the jars, a relatively small one containing a universe with a prominent spiral galaxy, began to glow brighter. The activity within it sped up, stars within the galaxies blurring into streaks of light. We watched, mesmerized, as a supernova erupted within one of the galaxies, a blinding flash of energy that briefly outshone everything else in that contained cosmos. Then, just as quickly, Penrose reversed the dial, and the universe returned to its previous state, the supernova fading, galactic structures resuming their slow, majestic dance. Anderson was ecstatic, peppering Penrose with questions about the technical details, the underlying physics, the potential applications. Collins, while still skeptical, was clearly captivated, his scientific curiosity overcoming his initial disbelief. I felt a growing unease. It wasn't just the sheer audacity of Penrose's creation, it was something else, something more subtle, more disturbing. I moved away from the group, drawn to the data displays connected to each jar. I focused on the output of the spectroscopic analyzers, instruments designed to dissect the light emitted from each universe, revealing its composition, temperature, and redshift. These were state-of-the-art devices, beyond anything I had access to in my own lab. I focused primarily on one, and, scrolling through the complex readings, energy signatures, gravitational patterns, I saw a pattern in the distribution of galaxies, a fluctuation in the background radiation that echoed my own research, my datapad. I pulled it out, accessing my files, my years of data collected from observations of the universe, my simulations, my increasingly desperate attempts to make sense of the subtle anomalies I'd detected. And there it was, a correlation, a statistically improbable, almost impossible correlation. The patterns I was seeing in one of the jars, a relatively large one containing a universe with a prominent spiral galaxy that resembled our own, were mirroring the data from my own research, with an accuracy that defied all logical explanation. I questioned Penrose, trying to mask the growing panic. "Mr. Penrose," I said, "the parameters you've used to create these universes, how did you determine them? What are the specific values of the fundamental constants within this particular jar?" I gestured towards the one that had caught my attention. Penrose turned, his piercing eyes fixing on me. "The parameters, Dr. Beckett, are derived from observation, from a careful study of the existing universe, from a deep understanding of the underlying principles that govern reality." He paused, his smile widening slightly. "Let's just say I have a unique perspective." His answer was evasive, deliberately ambiguous. It was a non-answer, a carefully crafted deflection that only served to deepen my suspicion. I spent the rest of the allotted time studying that one jar, using the spectroscopic analyzer to gather more detailed data, comparing it with my own research, running simulations, cross-referencing astronomical data. The similarities were undeniable. The distribution of galaxies, the types of stars within those galaxies, the presence of a planetary system within the habitable zone of a star in one of the larger galaxies. It was all too perfect, too precise, too eerily familiar. I focused on one galaxy within that universe, a galaxy within which was a star system that seemed promising, a small blue-green planet orbiting a yellow dwarf star. I zoomed in, using the lab's powerful optics, and I saw continents, oceans, an atmosphere, a world that looked remarkably like our own. The general shapes, the distribution of land masses, the patterns of ocean currents. It was all uncannily familiar. It was like looking at a distorted mirror image of Earth, a twisted reflection of our own world, evolving at an accelerated pace within a contained universe. The implications slammed into me. If this jar contained a universe that so closely resembled our own, if Penrose had somehow managed to replicate the fundamental constants, the physical laws, the very fabric of our reality, then what did that say about our universe? Was it also a construct, a simulation, a plaything in the hands of some unseen, all-powerful being? Was Penrose God? The room began to spin. I felt a wave of nausea, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. The other scientists were gathering their belongings, preparing to leave, their minds buzzing with the implications of Penrose's creation. But I was trapped, frozen in place, staring at that one jar, at that one universe, at that twisted reflection of our own world within it. Penrose approached me, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Dr. Beckett," he said, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. "You seem troubled. Is there something I can help you with?" I met his eyes, trying to hold his intense, almost predatory glare. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words were caught in my throat, choked by the rising tide of fear and existential dread. He smiled, a slow, chilling expression that revealed nothing. "I trust you'll find your accommodations comfortable," he said. "We have much more to discuss, you and I." He turned and walked away, his cane tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the floor, leaving me alone in the chamber of cosmoses, alone with my terrifying discovery. Mr. Jones appeared silently at my side and indicated it was time to leave. The heavy door closed, and I knew the questions this place raised would never allow for any comfortable rest. Sleep was a distant, impossible dream. My mind raced, replaying the images from the observation chamber, the swirling universes, the chilling familiarity of that one particular jar. I paced the confines of my stark, minimalist guest room. I returned to my datapad, my years of research on the cosmic microwave background, the distribution of galaxies, the subtle anomalies that had always hinted at a deeper, hidden order. I cross-referenced it with the data from the lab systems, focusing on that one terrifyingly familiar universe. The statistical correlations were overwhelming. It wasn't just similar, it was a near-perfect match. I ran simulations trying to find some flaw, some discrepancy, some explanation that didn't involve the unthinkable. But the more I searched, the more convinced I became. Driven by a desperate need to understand, I decided to exploit a small security oversight I'd noticed during the earlier demonstration. Penrose's focus on external threats had perhaps led him to neglect the internal ones. Using a combination of my own coding skills and a few borrowed algorithms, ironically derived from Penrose Industries patents I'd reviewed years ago, I managed to access the restricted sections of the estate's network. It was a risky move, but the potential reward confirmation of my suspicions outweighed the danger. I navigated the network, finding research logs, encrypted data streams, and complex mathematical equations that seemed to defy all known physics. Penrose's notes were cryptic, filled with philosophical pronouncements and references to ancient texts, esoteric symbols, and concepts that bordered on the mystical. But amidst the obfuscation, I found glimpses of his true intentions. He wasn't just creating universes, he was controlling them. He referred to a God equation, a set of formulas that allowed him to manipulate the fundamental constants within the jars, shaping the evolution of those universes to his will. I found evidence. Concrete, undeniable evidence. A series of data logs, meticulously documenting Penrose's observations of our universe. Not just general observations, but detailed, granular data, mirroring the very anomalies I had been studying for years. It was clear. Penrose wasn't just creating universes in his image. He had been studying ours for a long time, perhaps even guiding it. The implications were staggering. We were not just observers of the cosmos. We were subjects in an experiment. Our reality, our history, our very existence might be nothing more than a simulation, a carefully crafted construct within one of Penrose's jars. I had to confront him. I had to understand, and perhaps I had to find a way to stop him. I sought him out the next morning, finding him, as I suspected, in the observation chamber. He was standing before the familiar universe jar, his frail figure silhouetted against the swirling light. The other scientists were present, but they were engrossed in their own observations, seemingly oblivious to the existential threat looming over them. "Mr. Penrose," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to control it. "We need to talk." "Dr. Beckett," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur. I anticipated this conversation. I presented my evidence, the data correlations, the research logs, the inescapable conclusion that our universe was, in all likelihood, one of his creations. I expected denial, anger, perhaps even violence. But Penrose's reaction was far more disturbing. He listened patiently, his expression unchanged, a faint smile playing on his lips. "And what if it is, Dr. Beckett?" he said, his voice calm, almost amused. What if your universe is, as you say, a construct? Does that make it any less real? Does that diminish the significance of your lives, your experiences, your achievements? It was the question that had been tormenting me, the existential abyss that had opened up beneath my feet. It means we have no free will. It means we are puppets, dancing to a tune we cannot hear. Penrose chuckled. Free will, Dr. Beckett, is an illusion. A comforting fiction that humans cling to in the face of the vast, indifferent cosmos. Whether your universe is a simulation or not, you are bound by the laws of physics, by the constraints of your biology, by the limitations of your perception. He gestured towards the rows of universe jars, a chilling glint in his eyes. Observe, Dr. Beckett, he said, his voice a soft, almost seductive purr. You believe I have created your universe. Perhaps I have. Perhaps I haven't. Does it truly matter? What matters is control. He walked slowly along the row of jars, his fingers trailing lightly over their glass surfaces. He stopped before one, a relatively small jar containing a universe dominated by volatile young stars and chaotic nebulae. This one, he said, is not to my liking, too unpredictable. He reached out to the control panel associated with that jar, his fingers deftly adjusting the dials and buttons. The universe within the jar began to shift, to change. We witnessed, in accelerated time, a catastrophic cascade of events. Stars went supernova in rapid succession, their explosions disrupting the gravitational balance of entire galaxies. Nebulae collapsed in on themselves, triggering runaway star formation and violent collisions. It was a terrifying display of power, a demonstration of Penrose's ability to manipulate and ultimately destroy entire universes. He did all of it with a detached, almost clinical disinterest, as if he were simply pruning a garden. He moved on to another jar, this one containing a universe with a seemingly stable, mature galaxy. This one is tedious, too orderly, too predictable. Again, he manipulated the controls. This time, the changes were more subtle but no less devastating. We observed a gradual decay in the fundamental constants, a weakening of the forces holding matter together. Stars began to flicker and die. Galaxies slowly dissipated into diffuse clouds of gas and dust. It was a slow, agonizing death, a universe unraveling at the seams. Penrose turned back to me, his eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. You see, Dr. Beckett, I am not bound by the limitations of your science, by your morality, by your sentimentality. I have transcended them. I have become the architect of realities, plural, and just as easily as I create, I can also uncreate. He paused, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. He didn't need to directly manipulate the familiar universe jar. The implication was clear enough. He could do it if he chose to. The demonstration was a masterclass in subtle intimidation. It wasn't about showing what he had done to our universe, but what he could do. I realized with a sinking feeling that direct confrontation was futile. Penrose held all the cards. He was not a scientist. He was a god, at least within the confines of his creation, and he viewed us, and perhaps our entire universe, as nothing more than data points in his grand experiment. He was also, to my growing unease, becoming somewhat bored of the conversation, as if I were a minor distraction, a flawed equation. "Get out," he said, his voice dismissive, the flicker of amusement gone, replaced by a cold indifference. He ordered Mr. Jones, who had been standing silently by the door, to escort me from the observation room. I was trapped within Penrose's estate, and existentially within a potentially simulated reality. The other scientists, blinded by their own ambitions or simply unwilling to accept the truth, offered no solace, no alliance. I was alone, facing an unimaginable threat, with no clear path forward. The minimalist confines of my guest room felt like a cage. Penrose's words echoed in my mind, a chilling blend of arrogance and indifference. The architect of realities, plural. The implications were crushing. Direct confrontation was futile. He'd proven that with his casual destruction of those other universes, those miniature cosmoses snuffed out like candles in a cosmic wind. I returned to my datapad, my years of research now viewed through a horrifyingly new lens. My work on the cosmic microwave background, the distribution of galaxies, the subtle anomalies that had always hinted at a deeper order. Were they clues to our true nature, or merely artifacts of Penrose's manipulation? I needed to go deeper, to understand the mechanism by which Penrose controlled these universes, and by extension, perhaps our own. The God equation. That was the key. I needed to access his research logs, his data, anything that could shed light on this equation and the principles it governed. I spent hours lost in the depths of the network. I began to discern a pattern. Penrose wasn't just creating universes. He was connecting them. He was using a form of sustained, macroscopic quantum entanglement, a concept that had always been considered theoretical at best. The God equation, it seemed, was not a formula for creation, but a formula for control, a way to maintain and manipulate the entanglement between our universe and the one within the jar. It wasn't about containment, not directly. It was about entanglement. Our universe wasn't inside the jar, but it was linked to it, quantumly entangled, on a scale that defied comprehension. Penrose wasn't a god creating from nothing. He was a master manipulator, exploiting the fundamental interconnectedness of reality itself. And that, I realized, was the key to my plan. If I couldn't destroy the jar, or directly disrupt Penrose's control, perhaps I could sever the connection. I could break the entanglement, creating divergent timelines, effectively isolating our universe from his influence. I began to formulate a plan based on the very principles Penrose was using. The idea was to introduce a specific, highly complex quantum fluctuation into the jar universe, a fluctuation that would be fundamentally incompatible with the existing entanglement pattern. It would be like introducing a virus into a network, a carefully crafted piece of code designed to disrupt the flow of information, to break the connection. My modified spectroscopic analyzer, the one I'd used to gather data on the jar universes, could be repurposed. It could be used to generate the required fluctuation, a precisely calibrated beam of entangled photons that would, hopefully, sever the quantum strings that linked our reality to Penrose's creation. I spent hours running simulations, refining my calculations, testing my theories on virtual models of the jar universe. Each failed attempt was a crushing blow, a reminder of the immense complexity of the task and the catastrophic consequences of failure. But I pushed on, driven by a desperate, almost primal need to resist, to reclaim some semblance of agency in the face of cosmic indifference. Finally, I had it. A specific configuration of entangled photons, a complex quantum waveform that, according to my simulations, had a statistically significant chance of disrupting the entanglement pattern without triggering a catastrophic cascade of events. The ethical implications weighed heavily on me. Was I essentially killing a universe by separating it from our own? Was I condemning its inhabitants, if they existed, to an unknown fate? Or was I saving both universes from Penrose's potential manipulation, preventing him from using our reality as a plaything, a source of data, or worse? The questions gnawed at me, but I couldn't afford to dwell on them. I needed to act, to implement my plan before Penrose discovered my deception, before he decided to recalibrate our reality. I meticulously prepared the analyzer, double-checking the settings, ensuring the precise configuration of the entangled photons. The plan was to discreetly get to the observation chamber. I was ready as I could ever be. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in my hands. I was about to play God in a way, to tamper with forces I barely understood, to risk the fate of two universes on a desperate gamble. A sharp rap on the door. My heart leaped into my throat. "Dr. Beckett!" It was Mr. Jones. Mr. Penrose has requested that I inform you your time at the estate has come to an end. A vehicle is waiting. Relief washed over me. I was leaving. I was escaping Penrose's clutches, his chilling pronouncements, his unsettling power. But the relief was immediately followed by a surge of frustration. I hadn't implemented my plan. I hadn't severed the connection. I was leaving with the existential threat still looming, the sword of Damocles hanging over our reality by the thinnest of quantum threads. I had to make a choice. I could leave, accept the uncertainty, live with the constant fear of Penrose's potential manipulation. Or I could take one last final act of defiance against the architect of realities. "Of course, Mr. Jones," I said. "Just give me a few minutes to gather my belongings." He nodded, his expression impassive, but his presence undeniably menacing. "I will wait outside." The moment he was gone, I moved. I feigned packing, stuffing clothes into my bag with a deliberate slowness, buying myself precious seconds. My mind raced, calculating the risks, the probabilities, the sheer audacious madness of what I was about to do. I slipped out of my room, avoiding the main corridors, taking the service passages I'd discovered during my network explorations. The estate was silent, almost eerily so. It felt like I was moving through the arteries of a giant sleeping beast. As I moved, I caught a glimpse of the other scientists being escorted towards the main entrance by other members of Penrose's security team. They looked subdued. Whatever their individual reactions to Penrose's revelations, they were clearly leaving under a cloud of apprehension, their scientific curiosity overshadowed by a shared, unspoken fear. It was a brief, fleeting glimpse, but it reinforced my own sense of isolation, my conviction that I was the only one willing, or perhaps able, to take action. I reached the observation chamber. The massive circular door was closed, but I knew the override code, a sequence I'd extracted from Penrose's research logs. The door slid open, revealing the chamber of cosmoses, the rows of universe jars swirling with their miniature galaxies, their contained realities. My target was there, the familiar universe. I positioned the modified spectroscopic analyzer, aligning the beam with the designated region within the jar, a specific cluster of galaxies that, according to my calculations, was the nexus of the quantum entanglement, timeline divergence, the point of strongest connection between our universe and this one. A soft hum filled the air, and a beam light, invisible to the naked eye, shot out from the analyzer, striking the jar. I held my breath, watching, waiting, expecting something. A visible change, a dramatic shift, a sign that my plan was working or failing catastrophically. But nothing. The universe within the jar continued to swirl, to evolve, its miniature galaxies spinning in their slow, majestic dance. I had no way of knowing if it was working. I might have severed the connection, creating divergent timelines, isolating our universe from Penrose's influence. Or I might have done nothing at all, merely triggered a minor, cosmetic alteration in a simulated reality. "Dr. Beckett." Mr. Jones's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the silence. He was standing at the entrance to the chamber, his expression unchanged, but his presence radiating a silent, implacable threat. I hadn't heard him approach. "It's time to leave." I deactivated the analyzer, stepping away from the jar. There was no time for further analysis, no time for confirmation. I had to go. I followed Mr. Jones out of the chamber, out of the estate, into the waiting vehicle. The drive back to civilization was a blur. I sat in silence, staring out at the passing landscape, my mind replaying the events of the past few days, the revelations, the desperate plan, the uncertain outcome. Back in my small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by my books, my research, my familiar, if potentially simulated, reality, I tried to pick up the threads of my life. But everything had changed. I was haunted by the possibility that I was still living in a simulation, a plaything of Cassius Penrose. But I was also haunted by the possibility that I had succeeded, that I had severed the connection, potentially dooming the universe within the jar to an unknown fate, isolating it in its own separate reality. I searched for evidence, for any sign that Penrose's influence had been removed, that the familiar universe still existed, independent of our own. I scanned the astronomical data, looking for any subtle shifts, any anomalies that might indicate a change in the fundamental constants, a divergence in the timelines. But I found nothing conclusive. The universe, as far as I could tell, remained unchanged. Or had it? I might never know the truth, never know if my plan succeeded or failed. But I had chosen to live with the uncertainty, rather than be consumed by it. And so, I returned to my work, to my observations of the night sky, to my search for answers in the vast, indifferent cosmos. The universe might be a simulation, a carefully crafted construct, or it might be real, independent, governed by laws beyond our comprehension. But either way, I would continue to explore it, to question it, to seek meaning in the face of the unknowable. That, I realized, was my act of defiance. My way of asserting my existence, my agency, in a world that might be nothing more than a fleeting illusion. The weight of all possible futures, the ones within the jars and without. And that, I knew, made it real enough.